Jimmy Butler paying those postseason dividends, 22 points, 9 assists in Game 3. Kawhi Leonard, second in playoff scoring, but his Toronto Raptors enter Game 4 this afternoon, down 2-1 in a series. And Portland and Denver will fill the Moda Center at 7 tonight, 48 hours after playing the first quadruple overtime playoff game since 1953. Welcome to Game Time Live. Chris Miles here with Smitty and Sam Mitchell on my left, Brian McDonough on my right. Before we get into Game 4 between the Raptors and Sixers, let's take a look back at Game 3. And Kawhi Leonard led the way for Toronto in their loss with 33 points. The Claw is actually averaging 37 points per game in this series against the 76ers. The biggest story in Game 3 was the breakout performance by the 76ers big man. Joel Embiid scored 33 points and added 5 blocks. Embiid was also 3 for 4 from three-point range. The self-proclaimed most unstoppable player in the NBA sure looked the part after struggling in the first 2 games of the series. Embiid had more points, blocks, shots made in Game 3 than he had in the first 2 games of the series combined. The Raptors, well, they have the challenge of also managing an injury to their second most productive player this postseason, Pascal Siakam, listed as doubtful ahead of this afternoon's tip. Here is Toronto head coach Nick Nurse.
We're still waiting, Doug. He hasn't been on the court yet, but they're going to take him out there and see how he's doing. Obviously had a team meeting this morning. Said it wasn't any worse than it was, so it's a good start.
So he'll be a game time decision?
Yes, sir.
Was he able to practice yesterday?
No. He didn't even dress for practice. Went through our team meeting and watched practice.
Is there a plan for who will start if he's not able to go?
There is.
That you're going to share?
That we haven't decided on yet. There's a couple of them, right? It's the same, couple options. Possibly Ibaka, possibly Van Fleet, and possibly one other guy.
So, Sam, put us in the shoes of Nick Nurse. Pascal Siakam, coming of age, 25-year-old, has been great all season, especially this postseason for Toronto. So if he can't give it a go, how does Nick Nurse adjust to that?
It's going to be difficult, man. You're talking about your second best player, arguably your second best defender. And when you look at all the things that this young man do and how he's gotten better, you just don't replace his productivity because he does a little bit of everything on both ends of the floor. I think it's going to have to be collective. There's not one guy that you're going to put in the lineup that does what he does, but it's going to have to be done by committee. Kawhi's going to have to keep doing what he's doing, but I think you got to look at, forget who they're going to replace him in the lineup. You got to look at a guy like Marc Gasol. Marc Gasol got to step up. They got to include him more in this offense. You're talking about 3 to 4 years ago, Marc Gasol was considered the best overall center in all the NBA when you look at passing, shooting, playmaking, and all those things of that nature. They got to start running the offense through him a little bit more. I know it's tough, but they got to share the load between he and Kawhi. Obviously, everybody else got to pick their game up, but you're just not going to find one guy that you substitute that's going to do what Pascal Siakam been doing.
And you can't substitute what Kawhi Leonard has been doing for the Toronto Raptors at all either. Ryan, when you look at the on-off numbers, they are really staggering considering this team looks like they're in control of the series when Kawhi Leonard is on the floor, but when he's not so much. So who needs to step up? I mean, it seems like the answer would be Kyle Lowry, right?
It's Kyle Lowry. It's also the bench of the Toronto Raptors who have been outplayed pretty significantly by Philly's bench in this series. And if you look at the matchups on paper coming into this series, put Toronto's bench on one side and Philly's on the other, I think most of us, maybe all of us, would have taken the guys on Toronto's roster. But if you look at the matchups and you look at the scoring throughout the course of the series, Philly's bench has outscored Toronto's bench 73-30. They're plus 43, which is not something I anticipated coming into this series.
Smitty, on the other side of the court, Philadelphia, it seemed as if in Game 1, defensively a little bit lost, but offensively trying to figure it out. And now they have Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris running the pick and roll. What has that done for their offense?
Well, I think when you have two players that have offensive mind and offensive threat, it puts a lot of pressure on the defense of the Toronto Raptors. And I think also the mindset, to me, Sam, Ryan, and also Chris, Joel Embiid wants to be physical. And I think whenever he wants to be physical, get down in the paint, the whole thing about a game of basketball is to draw two. If you have a player that can draw two, obviously you swing and you have an off-balance defense. And what he's doing right now on the defensive end and the offensive end, as you can see in these pick and rolls, he has space now. He just doesn't have to space out for Ben Simmons, who's guys that only can drive on a pick and roll. He's getting Jimmy Butler, who's collapsing the defense. Now Marc Gasol, not the fast of foot, has to come down and run out to Joel Embiid, and then the big fella can do this. I don't want him doing too much of that, Sam, but I like that he can have an option with Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris running the pick and roll.
So, Ryan, I guess the odd man out and listen to what Smitty is saying is Ben Simmons, because the stats are kind of pedestrian, 10, 5, and 5 in this series. So if he's not running the offense, where's Ben Simmons' value?
Well, that's the question. When you have a player who's not a great perimeter shooter, and unless he's a five-man, which Ben Simmons obviously is not, where do you put him? Do you put him in the dunker slot? Do you put him in the weak side corner? If you put him on the weak side corner or the weak side wing, the defense will shift and load up on Embiid and Jimmy Butler and the other top offensive weapons for Philly, Tobias Harris. So where do you put him? I think if you're Brett Brown, you have to move him around. You have to try to get him some slot cuts, get him in the dunker some, because Ben Simmons still needs to touch the ball and be a factor in this series. But you know they're not going to guard him on the perimeter, and Philly has been more effective with the ball in the hands of Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris.
Sam, a guy you mentioned earlier, Marc Gasol, he came into this series with the reputation as the Joel Embiid stopper, right? Because of the stats of Joel Embiid head-to-head against Marc Gasol. In games 1 and 2, it kind of seemed as if that narrative was playing out. But what happened in Game 3? How did Embiid break out and have those 33 points?
Well, anytime you're 7 feet and you're as active as he is, and you can knock down at 3 and take your guy off the dribble, think about it. How many 7-foot guys, other than DeMarcus Cousins, that you can throw the ball to 25 feet from the basket, and he's comfortable shooting a 3. He can run a DHO on the perimeter. He can run a pick and pop, and he can beat you one-on-one with a crossover dribble spin down the lane and dunk. You don't have those type of guys like that. And I think right now what you're finding out, when you get to a series and you start attacking people's strengths and weaknesses, Joel Embiid understands 2 things. He's a superior athlete over Marc Gasol. He's quicker, he's faster. And when he starts making that 3, then he's unguardable. I think what Toronto's going to have to do, they're going to live with him shooting the jumper, because to me, if Joel Embiid, I would hope and pray that he makes his first 2 threes, because that may entice him to stay out there on that perimeter, because when he gets 15 to 17 feet in, he is a load and no one can guard him. So if it was me, I would give him all the 3-point shots that he wants, anything to keep him from attacking the basket.
Yeah, and again, sticking with the idea of, okay, so they've unlocked Joel Embiid, and now you have Ben Simmons not being his most productive. How do you get them both to be productive in the same game?
Well, you wish that. I know all general managers and coaches want everybody to play well, but bottom line is wins and losses. We're not looking at numbers right now. Philadelphia is up 2-1. You want Ben Simmons to play better, but if I can keep winning games to where we're going, you know, Ben Simmons is going to have to figure it out, because I'm not going to change for Ben Simmons to have better stats if I'm winning games. And right now, the Philadelphia 76ers are winning games. I like him in the dunker spot. I like him in the fast break situation. He's a basketball player. You have to figure it out. I know he hasn't played without the basketball a lot in his career, but if we're winning games, he's going to have to figure out, do other things. You don't have to score to be good. You can rebound and defend. And he has an assignment, Sam. Guard Kawhi Leonard.
Thank you. That's what I'm sitting there thinking. He's 6'10", he's athletic. He can be a primary defender. That could be his thing. Like to Ryan's point, he can be a slot burn. Anytime a 6'10" guy dives to the basket, we know he can make a layup, okay? So I would put him in that slot, but I would think about him being an elite defender. And when he gets the rebound, lead the breaker, push the break, push the pace, and find your shooters.
Well, guessing Kawhi Leonard, that hasn't really been working out so well for the 76ers in this series. Averaging 37 points per game this series so far is Kawhi Leonard. CJ McCollum, 55 minutes in that quadruple overtime game. What does he and the rest of his team have left in the tank? We'll discuss next on